Raymond Dell was known as a quiet, reclusive mechanic until police followed a missing hiker west trail into the woods and uncovered his darkest secret, a hidden torture forest designed for ritual killings, documented on tape and streamed to a secret global audience. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized Raymond wasn't a T working alone, and the terror they uncovered was just the beginning of something far more sinister. Maple Ridge was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, and the most pressing issue was usually a lost dog or a local bake sale. Nestled near the edge of a vast and thickly wooded forest, the town had always felt safe, even isolated from the world's darker realities. That illusion shattered one early autumn morning when 29-year-old backpacker Eric Langston was reported missing. He had left for a solo hiking trip into the nearby woods 3 days earlier and hadn't yet returned. At first, people assumed he'd simply gotten turned around, maybe lost or injured. But as hours turned into days with no sign of him, concern deepened into dread. The local police organized a small search team, joined by volunteers and forest rangers. They combed the well-known trails, calling Eric's name and checking ranger stations, but their efforts came up empty. The area was known for being dense and hard to navigate off-path, but it was not considered dangerous. There were no large predators or known criminal activity in the woods. Still, something about Eric's disappearance didn't sit right. His friends said he was an experienced hiker. He had left with enough supplies for a short trip and was familiar with the terrain. The idea that he had simply vanished didn't make sense. 2 weeks later, a pair of teenagers exploring the outskirts of the forest made a chilling discovery. They had strayed from the usual path, searching for a spot to record a video for social media. While walking through an overgrown section of the woods, they came across a narrow trail almost entirely concealed by fallen branches and brambles. Curiosity pulled them in. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the area felt. After 20 minutes of trekking, they found themselves in a small clearing. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned campsite, except something was wrong. The ground was littered with shredded clothing, bits of rope, and bones that didn't belong to any animal native to the area. Terrified, the teens ran and reported their findings to the police. Investigators returned to the site and immediately cordoned off the area. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. Scattered around the clearing were crude tools, some rusted, others modified in disturbing ways. A large wooden post stood at the center, dark stains soaking the base. Trees nearby had symbols carved into them, crude, violent shapes resembling faces twisted in pain. The forensic team quickly identified human remains buried in shallow graves around the perimeter. Some were recent, others decomposed beyond recognition. The discovery launched a full-scale investigation. What had started as a routine missing person case now appeared to be something much more sinister. The forest, long seen as a peaceful escape for hikers and nature lovers, was hiding a brutal secret. Eric Langston's disappearance was no accident, and as the evidence began to pile up, it became clear. He wasn't the only one who had vanished in those woods. The crime scene in the forest quickly became the focus of national attention. Law enforcement agencies from outside Maple Ridge were called in to assist. Investigators began widening their search area, believing the clearing was only part of a larger system hidden within the woods. Drones were deployed to scan for abnormal patches in the tree line, signs of disrupted soil, or hidden trails invisible to the naked eye. What they found was deeply disturbing. A network of footpaths, some barely more than animal tracks, connected a series of smaller clearings and oddly arranged wooden structures. Each one bore signs of human activity, burn pits, makeshift restraints, and tools designed not for survival, but for cruelty. The level of planning shocked even seasoned investigators. Someone had built this system slowly and methodically, using the natural cover of the forest to hide every trace. No one had ever reported unusual sounds or suspicious behavior in the area, and yet the signs were clear. This place had been used regularly, perhaps for years. It wasn't just a crime scene, it was a carefully constructed nightmare. Investigators started cross-referencing the forest's location with missing persons reports from surrounding counties. A pattern began to emerge. Over the last 7 years, at least 11 individuals had vanished within a 50-mile radius. Most were hikers, loners, or people with no close family to push for thorough investigations. Each case had been dismissed as an accident or lost to the wilderness. Now, with fresh evidence emerging from the woods, those assumptions were being reconsidered. The forest hadn't just swallowed people by chance. Someone had been waiting there. The break in the case came from a piece of weather-beaten plastic, an old ID badge found partially buried under leaves near one of the structures. It belonged to a man named Raymond Dell, a local mechanic who had disappeared 3 years earlier. He was quiet, lived alone, and his disappearance had barely made headlines. But the discovery of his ID was enough to reopen his case. Detectives visited his former home, a rundown cabin on the outskirts of town. There, they found what they hadn't expected, an underground bunker sealed beneath the floorboards. Inside the bunker were journals, blueprints, and photographs, images too disturbing to release publicly. The photos showed victims inside the forest, bound and restrained in various stages of torment. The journals revealed the mind of a calculated predator, someone who didn't just kill for the sake of it, but who treated torture as a form of personal ritual. The killer documented every step, every scream, every final moment with chilling precision. What struck the investigators most was that the writing didn't stop with Raymond's disappearance. There were entries dated months after he had vanished, suggesting that either someone else had continued the work or Raymond had never truly disappeared. The discovery confirmed what everyone feared. This was not the work of a random madman. It was a system, a plan carried out with patience and purpose. And the forest was far from finished giving up its secrets. As forensic teams continued to explore the hidden forest, their discoveries became increasingly macabre. Deeper into the woods, they uncovered yet another clearing, this one even more elaborate than the first. A circle of sharpened wooden stakes surrounded a decaying structure made from scavenged metal and rotting timber. Inside, the walls were covered in newspaper clippings, missing persons reports, obituaries, and strange handwritten notes. Strings connected photographs to maps, forming a spiderweb of information that suggested a method to the madness. This wasn't chaos. It was a calculated project, an ongoing obsession carried out with chilling dedication. Near the back of the structure, investigators found a rusted metal cabinet sealed with chains. When they forced it open, they were met with a sight that would haunt them for years. Inside were dozens of old cassette tapes, each carefully labeled with a name and date. Alongside them were flash drives, VHS tapes, and even developed film reels. Authorities quickly set up a secure facility to review the contents. What they saw confirmed the worst fears. The killer had documented everything, every victim's capture, every moment of torment, every final breath. These were not trophies. They were records, evidence of something far deeper than simple brutality. The man thought to be responsible, Raymond Dell, suddenly became a far more complex figure. New leads surfaced after the discovery of the tapes. One showed a second individual assisting in one of the acts. Face hidden by a mask, voice disguised, but clearly present. This revelation changed the direction of the investigation. It was no longer the case of a lone killer. There was now proof of at least one accomplice, possibly more. Detectives expanded their scope, re-examining anyone who had known Raymond, worked with him, or had gone off the radar around the time of the earlier disappearances. DNA testing confirmed that some of the remains found in the forest belonged to victims who had been missing for over a decade. But there was something strange about the site itself. It was designed with unusual precision. The layout of the clearings matched patterns found in obscure occult symbols, some dating back centuries. Experts in ritualistic behavior were brought in to analyze the markings. Their conclusion was terrifying. The forest wasn't just a place of torture. It was a stage for a ritual, repeated over and over, with elements that mimicked ancient sacrificial rites. The killer hadn't been seeking power in the traditional sense, but control, dominance, and a feeling of godlike superiority. Then came the most unexpected twist. A match was found between one of the fingerprints lifted from a tape case and a name in a federal database. It belonged to a man who had served time years earlier for violent crimes, but he was an Aut Raymond Dell. He was still alive and living under a different identity in a nearby town, just 2 hours away. His arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Under questioning, he hinted at something investigators had feared all along. The forest was not unique. It was just one site in a larger network, and others like it were still in operation. Authorities raced against time, unraveling the web of horror that had spread farther than anyone had imagined. With the second suspect now in custody, federal agencies became involved, forming a multi-jurisdictional task force to investigate the existence of similar hidden sites. Data from the confiscated tapes, journals, and digital evidence pointed to multiple coordinates across state lines, remote wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and isolated farmland, all marked with chilling precision. The network was larger than previously believed, spanning several states and possibly involving a number of individuals who shared the same ideology or followed the same rituals. As officers followed the leads, more evidence surfaced. At one site in northern Michigan, skeletal remains were discovered beneath a derelict barn with tools, and structures nearly identical to those found in the original forest. In southern Illinois, another clearing was found, marked with strange symbols, and a buried container filled with personal items from several victims. The design and layout of each site mirrored one another, as if constructed using the same blueprints, reinforcing the belief that this was not the work of isolated killers, but a coordinated effort by a sadistic collective. Investigators traced the origins of the group through encrypted online forums and private communication channels. Deep within the dark web, they uncovered a network where members shared footage, techniques, and even location kits that included instructions for creating similar torture forests. The level of organization was horrifying. It became clear that the group had been operating in secrecy for years using coded language and burner accounts to recruit new members, some of whom were responsible for producing content for anonymous viewers. This wasn't just about killing. It was about performance, control, and power, broadcast to a hidden audience willing to watch. The psychological profile of the perpetrators revealed a disturbing pattern. Most members lived in isolation, had histories of abuse or violent behavior, and possessed a desire to dominate others completely. But it was the community aspect that shocked experts the most. They weren't acting alone. They found solace and encouragement in others like themselves, forming a twisted society that fed off each other's depravity. Each crime wasn't just a private act of violence. It was a contribution to a greater, grotesque legacy. Back in Maple Ridge, families of the missing gathered at town hall meetings, desperate for answers. Authorities confirmed that some of the victims had been kept alive for extended periods, moved between sites, and systematically tortured. The emotional toll on the community was overwhelming. Memorials began to appear near the edge of the forest, but the area was permanently sealed off by law enforcement. It was now considered one of the most active and horrific serial crime scenes in U.S. history. The more investigators uncovered, the more chilling the truth became. The forest wasn't a random choice. It was specifically selected for its isolation, history, and terrain. It provided cover, silence, and a place where screams wouldn't carry. The killer, or killers, had studied every detail. They knew how to vanish into the trees and how to turn nature into a cage. Just when investigators thought the depths of the horror had been fully uncovered, another shocking development shifted the course of the case. Digital forensic experts recovered a corrupted hard drive from one of the accomplices' properties. After weeks of decoding and repair, what they found was more disturbing than any physical evidence: plans for a live streaming platform designed exclusively to broadcast the acts committed in the torture forests. Buried in the code were schedules, usernames, and encrypted payment records indicating that these events were not only recorded, but monetized. People had been paying to watch, from hidden cameras mounted in trees to infrared drones disguised as wildlife. The entire forest had been turned into a nightmarish broadcast studio. This revelation changed everything. It confirmed that the acts committed were part of an underground industry, a market of real-time human suffering. Viewers from around the world had logged in to observe, and in some cases, even vote on the fate of victims. Interactive features allowed anonymous users to choose methods of torture, select which victim would be targeted next, or even communicate with the perpetrators in real time. It was cruelty outsourced, incentivized, and enjoyed from the comfort of someone's home. The scope of the operation was far more advanced than anyone had predicted. The FBI, in cooperation with international cybercrime units, launched a global manhunt for the users who had participated or paid to view the streams. Some were tracked down through cryptocurrency transactions and IP traces, leading to arrests in multiple countries. Among those captured were seemingly normal individuals, businessmen, teachers, even a retired judge. Their involvement exposed a frightening reality. The audience for such atrocities was not confined to any specific demographic. Evil had a wide reach, and it wore ordinary faces. Meanwhile, Maple Ridge struggled to return to some version of normal. The once peaceful town had become infamous, a symbol of unspeakable horror. News vans lined the streets. Survivors' families were flooded with media requests. But behind the chaos, a quiet pain settled over the community. For some, closure would never come. Many of the remains found in the forest were too damaged to identify. Others had likely been moved or destroyed. Families clung to the hope that their loved ones had not suffered. But the evidence rarely allowed for such comfort. The forest was permanently sealed off, deemed a federal crime zone. Motion sensors, security cameras, and warning signs surrounded the area. But even that wasn't enough for some locals, who demanded the entire section of woods be cleared or burned. They didn't want a monument or a memorial. They wanted it erased. But the memory of what had happened there was already etched into the national consciousness. Though arrests had been made and the operation dismantled, the lingering fear remained. How many others were still out there, watching, waiting, or planning? The forest had revealed one layer of a nightmare, but law enforcement knew deep down that it might only be the beginning. Darkness this organized didn't disappear. It adapted, hid, and waited for the next shadow to fall.